October 13th was the day my life changed forever. Armed Interpol agents arrested me on a red notice at the Holiday Inn in Sofia, Bulgaria. It was around 7:30 in the morning. I had arrived in Bulgaria to speak at a conference and was one of the opening speakers and scheduled to speak in just over an hour. I received a message from my sister that my grandfather had just died. This day was not starting out well. As I was just about to go to breakfast, there was a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole. There were 3 men and a woman wearing blue jeans and black jackets. They looked like gangsters. I opened the door but left the security chain engaged. One of them produced a police badge. The woman spoke. "My name is Veronica. We are police. Do you know why we are here?" "No," I answered. With my extensive travels for Microsoft throughout the Middle East, Africa, and Russia, I've been approached by foreign intelligence services several times before, but never in this manner. I'd been to Bulgaria several times before without any issues. It was concerning that there were 4 of them and they were visibly armed. I was standing there in my underwear with Bulgarian Interpol agents staring back at me. "Bring your passport, and please also some pants," Veronica said. I quickly dressed and grabbed my U.S. passport and security pocket. They escorted me out of the hotel as other speakers and conference attendees were gathering in the lobby. Everyone saw me being escorted out of the hotel by a group of armed people. They put me into the back of an unmarked black police car. I was put in the center and surrounded by police officers. As we left, I noticed there was a second unmarked police car that was sitting in the parking lot, waiting for us, and now following our car. They weren't taking any chances. "These men are from Interpol. I am a police officer, but not Interpol. I'm here to translate. At the police station, we will show you documents," Veronica said. We arrived at the police station. Everyone entered an empty office at the far end of the hall. "You are being detained on an Interpol red notice for kidnapping," Veronica told me. This was when I realized this was not the usual Liza victim, my ex-wife. Something much more serious. Smoke quickly filled the room. I was trapped. It was an emergency because 90 seconds had passed and it was Bulgaria. All the men lit up cigarettes for fear of their nicotine levels dropping to critical levels. They cracked the window open a tiny bit, but it was cold outside. They wanted to strike that delicate balance between suffocation and warmth. I knew asking them to open it more would be like asking them to bring me some caviar. I'm very sensitive to cigarette smoke, though, so I asked anyway. "Can you open the window a little bit more? The smoke is really bothering me," I asked politely. One of the men responded in a half grunt, half laugh, and a stare. He looked as if I'd asked him to donate his kidney. No translation was necessary. I've lived in Russia and I speak conversational Russian. I did not inform them of this fact. Bulgarian and Russian are similar, kind of like Dutch and German. Speakers of each can converse in their own languages but be understood by the other if they stick to the basics. This allowed me to understand much of what was said. I never let on that I understood many of their conversations, even the parts that Veronica did not translate. None of the men spoke English. The interrogation began and Veronica translated back and forth. "Where is your son?" one of the male officers asked. "He's at home with his brother and sister," I replied. "Where is home?" he asked. I said, "You accuse me of kidnapping. I don't have a lawyer and I'm in a foreign country. We aren't on a first date. You've detained me. Give us your money and passport. Empty your pockets, including hidden pocket, onto the desk," an agent told me. I pulled out my hotel key, U.S. passport, credit cards, and money. There were euros, Swiss francs, Eastern Caribbean dollars, and several thousand U.S. dollars. At the time, the monthly pay of a Bulgarian police officer was under $1,000, and the money immediately made their eyes pop. "Why do you have so much money? Who carries as much money on them?" one of them asked while exhaling copious amounts of cigarette smoke. I explained, "I travel all throughout the Middle East and Africa, and I always carry emergency cash. I've been in countries when civil unrest or boom booms have occurred before, including hotels I've stayed in." "That's a lot of emergency money," one of them said with his eyes bulging. I simply explained, "In an emergency, that's not a lot." "Why do you have Swiss francs? Do you have Swiss bank accounts?" he asked. They couldn't hide their excitement. They really thought they had a super spy now, but the answer was simple. After Bulgaria, I'm headed to France, the Netherlands, and Switzerland to speak at more conferences. Before every trip, I always bring local money with me. "The money looks fake," one of them said. "It's not fake. It's Caribbean money. And even if it's fake, it's not a crime unless I've used it somewhere," I explained. This seemed to quickly deflate their excitement. They were sure they had a counterfeiter as well as a spy. But they still weren't convinced of what I was telling them. After all, I was probably the first American they'd ever arrested for Interpol, and they were quite excited. In fact, the American-Bulgarian extradition treaty had just been signed a few months earlier, and I may have been the first American ever under the treaty to try to be extradited. I didn't learn what the U.S. Embassy had said about me until later. They believed what the Americans told them, and they were the ones who captured quite a prize. One of them commented, "It looks like play money from Monopoly." They took all of my stuff. They put my documents and cards into a clear plastic sleeve and the larger items in a plastic shopping bag and put them into a safe. "Do you want us to call the American Embassy for you?" they asked. "No, thank you. They're the reason I'm in this mess. They aren't going to help me," I told them. "We need you to write a statement we will send to America, and we will wait for them to say what to do with you. We only take information now," Veronica told me. Only take information. Your English is quite good and I thank you for your translation services, but you've already taken my passport, documents, and personal items. What does information mean in Bulgarian? I asked. They gave me a pen and paper to write the statement. Please write a statement and we'll send it to the Americans, Veronica said. I wrote several pages. Several hours passed and one of the men returned. Americans send no response yet. It is night in America, said the man who returned. I asked, are we waiting for someone to come to work in the morning in American time? He replied, no, they work all time. We need office to work, move to hall and wait. I moved to the hallway. I had no watch. I had no idea of the time and I couldn't see outside to judge by daylight. After several more hours, Veronica returned and told me, the U.S. Embassy is here to see you. When you asked me, I told you not to call them. They're not here to help me. I don't want to see them, I said. Please just go talk to embassy people, she insisted. She led me a few doors down the hall to a different office. It was a police chief's office. He had a large desk buried under piles of papers. In front of his desk was a cushioned chair and a couch. Standing behind the desk was an older man. Welcome. I am police chief. Speak little English, the man said. He seemed a bit nervous, or at least a bit on edge. Maybe he hadn't had a cigarette the last few minutes. He was friendly, though. He offered his hand and I shook it. He motioned for me to sit on the couch. There was a balding man with a buzz cut sitting in a chair. He handed me his business card, which identified him as a Regional Security Service Officer. He had a folder about an inch thick and my U.S. passport. I'm Mr. Woody, and I'm from the embassy, he said. I eyed Woody warily. His name made me envision him with a cowboy hat and a pull string on his back. It put a smile on my face, which seemed to disturb him. That was fine with me. Let him be uneasy. Will you waive your right to a lawyer and speak to me directly? He asked. I'm not going to waive any rights, but I'll speak with you on limited topics, I replied. Without saying a word, the police chief stood up and left the room. I was suspicious of Woody. So far, he'd been polite. He clearly didn't like my answer, though, and I saw a noticeable change in his facial expression. Jekyll turned into Hyde. I think I even saw his head spin around, but I can't be sure. I was still acclimating to the low oxygen levels in the chief's office from all the cigarette smoke. The cowboy spoke again. You are charged with kidnapping, and you are going to prison for a very long time. I do cases like this all the time. They're going to extradite you. It's a slam dunk and you are going to a nasty prison. Woody shrieked at me like a crackhead. I didn't visibly react at all and I just stared at Woody with a smile. This caused Woody to visibly glitch for a few seconds while he processed my reaction. He tried changing tack again. Look, I'm just here to chat. I'm divorced too. My ex-wife is a witch with a big B. I'm not here to take sides, he said. Woody then reversed his demeanor again quickly. It was like being interrogated by a puppy with ADHD who just ate a bag of sugar. He snapped at me, where is the child? I'm not willing to discuss it without a lawyer, I responded calmly. This is when the cowboy started to lose it. He would ask me where the child was, then ask me an unrelated question. He repeated this back and forth a dozen or so times. Where is the child? Where is the child? Where is the child? He repeated as if he was being rebooted violently internally each time. I thought he might have been having a seizure. Woody was clearly trained in interrogation, but he utterly sucked at it. He thought if he just kept asking the same question over and over, I might somehow decide to answer without a lawyer being present. I don't know. Maybe his training simply consisted of reading interrogation for dummies. Woody wasn't able to intimidate me as he expected and was clearly becoming flustered. Next, he tried a 20 questions approach. Is the child in Bulgaria? He asked. No, I responded. I decided to play with this puppy and have some fun. Is the child with your parents in Tennessee? He asked. No, I replied. I suspected that Woody was a toilet paper tiger, and now I knew for sure. My father was deceased and my parents never lived in Tennessee. Woody was clueless and barely knew anything. I did not let on that I knew he was full of it. I wanted to play with him some more. Where is the child? He asked again. Look, if you're just going to ask me the same question over and over, let's just call it quits, I told him. It's hard to describe what Woody did next, at least when talking about an adult man from the U.S. Embassy. He threw a hissy fit. When Woody finished his hissy fit, wiped the drool from his mouth, and his voice became masculine again, he picked up my passport and showed it to me dramatically. This is your passport, he said. I paused and then very aloofly said, it appears that it is. His facial expression made it clear that this was not the response he was seeking. You are not getting your passport back. We are keeping it. Without it, you cannot travel, and you will have no other choice but to go back to the U.S., Woody continued. I paused again just to irritate him. I thought you said it was going to be extradited, I asked him. Yeah, well, he said in a dumbfounded tone. Woody was stumped and struggling to think where to go next. I thought I saw smoke coming out of his ears, but it was probably just some of the secondhand smoke that still permeated the office. I had a special U.S. passport with 100 pages. A normal U.S. passport had only 24. Because of my extensive travel and many visas, even at 100 pages, it was nearly full. This made finding stamps very difficult. Woody was searching and searching for my Bulgarian entry stamp and other information.
Where is your Bulgarian entry stamp? Did you enter illegally because we can't find it?
He asked me. I entered Bulgaria with my Caribbean passport because it's far easier for me to renew it than my American one. To renew my American passport, it costs far more, takes longer, and required me to take several flights to go to the U.S. Embassy in Barbados. To renew with my Caribbean one, I just went downtown where I lived. I didn't explain any of this to Woody because I was still having fun playing with him. Keep looking, I told him. Woody dove in again to search. He repeated his search several times and was becoming quite frustrated.
There are a lot of stamps in here for Pakistan,
he said with an accusatory tone and a facial expression reminiscent of Inspector Gadget. I worked for Microsoft Middle East and Africa and spent a lot of time in Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and other places, I said.
What kind of work does Microsoft do in Pakistan?
He asked. With a grin on my face, I simply replied, software.
What else did you do in Pakistan?
He asked as more spit flew from his mouth. Worked for Microsoft, but sometimes I had extra time and I would sightsee. Once I went to the mountains near Kashmir. Another time I attended a wedding, I answered him. The time I went to the mountains near Kashmir in 2007, I had accidentally gotten within 50 miles of where Osama bin Laden was hiding, but I didn't know that then or even at this time. I only found out when Osama was found a couple of years later. When this happened, Woody probably thought of me.
You mean you have friends in Pakistan? He asked.
Some work for Microsoft. Others were software developers I got to know on my trips and showed me around. Pakistan's a beautiful country, I told him.
Are you a Muslim?
He asked with a grin on his face that made him look like a wannabe Joker character. I paused and then replied, Inshallah, may Allah grant you wisdom. The cowboy didn't know how to respond. His face again froze and he looked like he was holding a wet fart in. Saudi visas require a declaration of your religion, and it's on the visas in English. I'm not Muslim, and for all the scrutiny he applied to my Saudi visas, he could have, and given his training, should have seen my religion. I've already established, though, that Woody wasn't the smartest cowboy on the ranch.
Do you speak Arabic?
He asked. I answered, Shoya shoya. Shoya in Arabic means a little.
What? What does that mean?
He asked. Arabic isn't even spoken in Pakistan. Woody was really trying to find literally anything he could use against me.
You have friends in Pakistan and have been to the mountain ranges in Kashmir. You have Pakistani multi-entry visas and speak Arabic. This does not look very good for you. When you go to trial, this will be brought up, Woody said as his eyes bulged. How is this related to what I'm being accused of? I asked. It just is, he mumbled as more drool emanated from his face hole. President Bush visited Pakistan. Did you interrogate him? 'Cause he's uber sketchy, I told him. Woody looked unamused and reverted to his favorite question. Is the child in Pakistan? Ooh, tempting. I could say yes. It possibly short-circuited his brain. I wasn't going to lie, though, but I would continue to yank this cowboy straight. No, I answered. Woody opened the thick folder he'd been fidgeting with. On top was a copy of my U.S. passport. He stared at it, trying to figure out what to do next. Your current wife is Russian, isn't she? He asked. Woody clearly had the intelligence backing of Google. Impressive. Yes, I replied. I remained unfazed. Woody demonstrated yet another technique he learned at spy school. He closed the folder and slammed it down on the desk very dramatically. Good. Okay, well, enough of this. I was just being polite. I have a big file here with everything I need to know, Woody said exasperatedly so. I knew the file was fake. The papers were ruffled and yellowing. There is no way the U.S. Embassy in Bulgaria had a large printed file on me, just sitting around and waiting. It was clearly stuffed with junk paper with a copy of my U.S. passport on top. Woody left and the Bulgarian police chief returned to the woman. She handed me her business card. My name is Deborah and I'm from Consular Services, she said. The police chief sat down behind his desk. Must be here on desk, secret papers. Very, very secret, he said. I guess Woody in his office for that long made him nervous. Maybe he didn't trust the U.S. Embassy either. Deborah spoke again. I'm not the same as Woody. She seemed to emphasize this as if she didn't like Woody and did not want to be associated with him. She continued, I'm here to help you. I can help you with basic needs and find a lawyer. Whether she was here to play the good cop to Woody's bad cop, I didn't know yet, but she didn't smoke and was polite, so that was a plus. Mr. Howard, do you need anything? She asked. I haven't eaten or been given even water to drink all day. You think the chief has any raki in his drawer? I replied. Please don't call my mom. Her dad just passed away a few hours ago, I told Deborah. I wanted to give my mom some time to deal with that.
I didn't know it yet, but the FBI had already started a full media blitz against me. My mom heard the news on the radio. International kidnapper caught in Bulgaria to be extradited back to the U.S. soon. Deborah left, but gave me a list of Bulgarian lawyers. I put Lance and Deborah's card in my shoe to keep them safe. The police chief asked me to return to the hallway and wait. Wait for what? Godot, I suppose. Outside the chief's office were some old cushioned chairs that apparently were too bad to remain in any office and had been pushed into the hallway. Still, they were far better than the wooden bench I'd been stuck on before. I chose carefully the best of them and waited. Another arrested person arrived and sat next to me. I'm not sure what language he spoke, but even I could tell his Bulgarian was heavily accented. I was unable to communicate with him, and after about an hour, he was taken away. Veronica returned. She and 2 other Bulgarian police officers used their personal cell phones to help me call lawyers. We found a lawyer who will represent you. His name is Victor, and he will find you tomorrow. Now we go to your hotel room and search your items, she said. The last part didn't sound good, but she was not asking. The same officers from before were ready to go, but a new officer joined. He didn't speak and was carrying a large black case. As we were leaving, another person was waiting in the hallway. My name is Jordan. I'm an official translator. The Bulgarian government hired me to translate, he said. In 2 unmarked black cars, we returned to my room at the Holiday Inn. The man with the black case sat at the desk and unpacked. I had imagined the case to contain a computer or electronics. Instead, it contained rubber gloves, clear bags, wax, a seal, and a camera. The way he acted and carried the case, I had imagined a spy kit, but it was stuff one could find at a street kiosk. I found his fake passport. Wow! We got it for sure. Interpol will love this, one of the agents said excitedly. Neither Veronica or Jordan translated, and I still didn't let on that I could understand most of what they were saying in Bulgarian. They searched every item in my hotel room and separated them into 2 piles, interesting and uninteresting. They were interested in my wallet, documents, airline tickets, family photos, MP3 player, laptop, and phone. They photographed and inventoried each individual item. Each item was put into a clear plastic bag and sealed with a wax stamp. They gave me a paper with a lot of text and a list of my items they were seizing. They need you to sign this paper, the translator told me. I can't read that. It's in Bulgarian. It could be a confession for murder. I'm not signing it, I replied. You need to sign it so they can take the items, he said. What if I don't sign it? I asked. If you don't sign this, it'll cause a lot of trouble for the Bulgarian agents, but they will still take your stuff, Jordan said. I don't intend to cause unnecessary trouble, but I'm not signing a legal document that I can't read, even if the men demanding it are armed. We came to a compromise. I wrote a statement in English confirming the list of seized items, and then my signature signified nothing more, so they couldn't add more later. Pack the other things and bring them with you, Jordan translated. I packed my clothes, toiletries, and book into my suitcase. We left the room, and again they surrounded me with armed agents front and back. It was dinner time, so speakers and attendees saw me being heavily escorted by armed Bulgarian men in black. The elevator opened up to a group of friends waiting to go up. Quite shocked, one of them asked, "Dude, what the frog?" They didn't give me time to respond, so quickly I blurted, "They Polanski'd me. Contact my wife." Roman Polanski had just been arrested 2 weeks ago, and this was still headline news. They put me back into one of the unmarked black cars. I hadn't been actually arrested yet, but it's clear that was coming. They became sloppy or maybe relaxed. They put me next to a door instead of the middle like before. I started to think about escaping. During the many stops in traffic, I could have easily opened the door and ran. I wasn't in tip-top shape, but I was in better shape than most of the agents, and I didn't smoke like a chimney. The 2 agents in front talked in Bulgarian, still oblivious to the fact that I could understand them. "Can you believe you had a fake passport?" the agent in the front seat asked the driver. "Yeah, they sell them in the black markets in Sofia," the driver replied. "Why Caribbean passport, though? Why not at least a good one like Canadian?" the agent asked back. "Too hard to fake, well, easier to fake some unknown country," the driver told him. "Why does he have a fake passport, though? Who is this guy?" the agent asked. "Don't know, but the Americans want him pretty badly," the driver answered back. "Got any more cigarettes?" the agent asked the driver. "Sure, friend, here you go," the driver replied and handed him his pack of cigarettes. The agent removed 2 cigarettes. He lit both and handed one to the driver. The car again filled with smoke. We arrived back at the Bulgarian police station and the translator left. I hadn't had food or water in over 18 hours. "Hey, the chief said I'd be fed and watered," I told them as we got out of the car. We went to a nearby cafe and I bought 3 bottles of water. I was too pissed off to eat. They took me to a new office and I sat on the couch. No one spoke, but I understood the 2 new officers were there to babysit. Here I found the legendary Bulgarian unicorn, a non-smoker. An officer was sitting behind his desk, and the office was clearly his. Next to him was a sign in English. "You might like to smoke. I like cigs. I don't have any cigs in your office, so don't smoke in mine." I read it and then glanced at him. Without saying a word, he smiled and nodded at me. It was a friendly gesture, so I assumed it was about the no smoking and not the other thing. Veronica returned about an hour later with yet another officer.
Please go with this policeman. He will take you to another place. Leave your suitcase here, but take your food. Take off your belt and shoelaces. Leave them here, she said.
I followed him outside. He took me to another nearby building. It was the jail. The jail cell had a wet cement floor and a single small opening with bars. I thought it was a temporary cell, but it wasn't. I was here for the night. The jail was near a university, and this was the local drunk tank for drunks and fighters. It was winter in Bulgaria, and I only had a light rain jacket. The bench was L-shaped and narrow with wide slapped gats. It was difficult and painful to even sit on. If you fell asleep, you fell off the bench onto the wet floor. Another person arrived about 2 hours later. He spoke Russian, and his name was Peter. Peter was drunk and was in a fight. We chatted to pass the time and later tried to sleep. 2 more people arrived but only spoke Bulgarian. Peter chatted with them. Now there were 3 rowdy and loud drunks. Only the clothing on our backs was allowed in the cell. Other items could be requested from the guard through the opening. Even my water bottles I had to ask for a drink and give back. The others didn't bring any water. They were Bulgarians, so as required by Bulgarian citizenship, each arrived with multiple packs of cigarettes. They asked for them one by one until they smoked them all, until the cell became a gas chamber. In Russian, I asked the guard with a slight chuckle, "Is there any chance of a blanket or maybe a pillow? Maybe I could get you a television too," he replied. The guard meant no malice. He didn't have any blankets to give us and was just having some fun. In fact, he was very friendly, and no matter how often we asked for water, cigarettes, or to go to the bathroom, he always obliged kindly and never expressed annoyance. The others carried on long, friendly conversations with him in Bulgarian through the whole. Only half my torso could fit on the bench, but it was better than the wet floor which later arrivals had. Finally, 3 of us were able to assemble a snug human pyramid, and were able to wedge ourselves in a way that we didn't fall on the floor and got about 2 hours sleep. The 4th man was still out of luck. Eventually, the pyramid collapsed, and it was back to talking and smoking. A family arrived and were put in the office across the hall. They seemed to be waiting for someone, but I never learned why they were here. After about an hour, they were taken down the hall, and I never saw them again. "They can only hold you for 24 hours at a judge's order, so you should be free in the morning. Good luck," one of the jailbirds told me while we were talking. Apparently, he was an experienced jailbird. Somehow, Peter fell asleep again. The other 2 only spoke Bulgarian, but as it shares some things with Russian, I gave it a go. Bouncing back and forth, I was able to communicate basics with one of them. The other man listened in, but didn't want to waste any breath that didn't involve nicotine. He told me where, what bus to catch, and the costs. I wanted to find Victor, the lawyer. Peter woke up and we chatted again. Later, I staked out the space by the small hole in the wall. From there, I could see outside down the hall and waited for the sun to rise. It began to snow. One might think this was the worst night of my life, but I've had an adventurous life, and this doesn't even come close. I was the first to be released. As the sun was rising, a police officer came for me. Peter was still asleep. How, I don't know. Maybe the hangover finally knocked him out. We returned to the main building, and I was given my belt back. After a short wait, Veronica returned and said, "Now we go by car to another facility." "A facility?" "I was told I could only be held for 24 hours without a judge's order," I told her. "You are not arrested. You are detained. Rules are different. You will have a hearing soon," she replied. Detained. This was the beginning of years of wordplay which the U.S. government would sponsor and play with great exuberance. Veronica, 2 police officers, and I got into a black car. "We are taking it to a detention center. It is a special place for people waiting for court. It is not a prison," she said. The difference between a prison and a detention center becomes important later, but it was a prison, just a special type, more wordplay. We arrived at the Bulgarian prison, my new Bulgarian home. It's a 6-story building inside a gated and guarded compound. As we approached, I saw many of the windows were broken. "Veronica, this might seem strange, but I would like for you to translate something for me to the officers in the car and back at the station. It is also for you to hear as well. I want you to thank everyone for acting professionally and not taking sides. Everyone helped me the best they could given the situation. No one mistreated me, and several went out of their way to assist me as they could. The situation for me is, of course, not a comfortable one, but I appreciate what was done for me," I said. She seemed visibly surprised. After a small pause, she translated for the driver and the officer in the back seat with me. "They thank you for your kind words and wish you luck in resolving your situation. I will tell the officers at the station also," she replied. The building we stopped in front of had broken windows in nearly every window above the first floor. I later learned this was for ventilation, and that the first floor were offices in which the windows could open, while the upper floors were for prisoners. The cells were sealed tight, nearly airtight. Also, prisoners had unlimited cigarettes and smoked non-stop. There were 2 layers of windows. The inner one was not transparent, but had a small sliding metal hatch about the size of a large phone that could be opened, but only revealed another non-transparent window. It offered little ventilation around the edges only. The outside world was not visible. Because of this, prisoners broke the outside windows through the small hatch so they could see the outside world and for ventilation. The holding cell could barely hold 4 people, if they were all standing and very cozily so. That's how tiny it was. There was one of 2 cells in the screening area just inside the door that would soon become familiar. After the guard completed the paperwork, he motioned for me to stick my hands through the bars and handcuffed me. He opened the cell and motioned for me to walk in front of him. Another guard appeared and we followed him to an office. The office had a desk and a small table surrounded by 2 chairs and also an open door to the next office. The guard removed my handcuffs. We'd only walked maybe 40 feet, so the handcuffs seemed an unusual measure, especially I was already inside the prison. I later learned why they were so cautious. The embassy told them I was violent. He pointed at my waist, then my feet, then the desk and said, "Tuka!" This was the first word anyone had spoken to me since I'd arrived. I had no idea what it meant. He didn't speak English or Russian. I stared at him and made it clear that I did not understand. The guard pointed at my nuts and again said, "Tuka!" My face changed rapidly from confused to concerned. This got his attention. He touched my belt and pointed at my shoes. Fortunately, he wasn't interested in my nuts, but instead my belt and shoelaces. He pointed at the desk and again said, "Tuka." He also wanted my jacket because it had a drawstring in the hood. A slim, gray-haired, older guard entered from the adjoining office. He directed and helped the other guard fill out an inventory list of my items. He seemed to be the senior guard. Next, they went through my suitcase. They never said anything to me except "Tuka." They pointed at things in my suitcase and then pointed at the desk, one of the chairs, or the table and said "Tuka." It became clear they were sorting my items. I thought "Tuka" meant suitcase. Then I thought it meant not allowed. Neither guess was correct. The guards took my money. They listed each bill individually on the inventory sheet, writing each and every serial number. This took quite some time. At the end, I signed the sheet confirming the list. "Tuka" kept confusing me and I kept putting things in the wrong pile. The guards became slightly frustrated but not irritated and patiently corrected me. I was becoming frustrated too, and hungry. I cursed slightly in Russian. The senior guard looked surprised. "Говорите по-русски?" The senior guard asked me in Russian, which means, "Do you speak Russian?" "Chut-chut," I replied in Russian, which means a little bit. He then asked me a few more questions in Russian, and I answered him in Russian. "Well, you might speak a little, but you speak it well and comfortably. Your paperwork says you're an American, so we assumed you only spoke English. It is a surprise to us that you speak Russian." "I'm Bulgarian, but my wife is Russian," he told me. He spoke in Bulgarian to the other 2 guards, telling them I spoke Russian. The other 2 guards sighed in relief and let the senior guard take over the rest of the conversation. Continuing in Russian, the senior guard told me, "These are the prison rules. Follow these and there will be no problems. Please sign them." They gave me an English version of the rules. I read and signed it. "Please put these items back in your suitcase. We will keep these locked up. The things in the chair you can put in the plastic bag and take with you," he told me. The pile in the chair had clothing, a book, a few toiletries, and shoes without laces. "I'm sorry, but we must handcuff you again. You'll be taken to one of the rooms for foreigners. It is the same as others, but there will only be foreigners in it. This particular room has people who are much cleaner than others. Many of our residents are quite untidy," he continued. They handcuffed me and 2 guards escorted me out. We passed through many security gates and climbed stairs. Final destination was a cell on the 3rd floor. Near the door was a small lockbox that I had to deposit my nail clippers and disposable razors into. My handcuffs were removed and I was ushered into a prison cell. They gave me a pillow, a blanket, and a cushion. Or at least that's what they were supposed to be. The wool blanket was the best of the bunch, but it was small, thin, and very scratchy. It was like a big Bulgarian Brillo pad. There were no sheets or mattress, only a thin, lumpy, blackened cushion that was probably manufactured when Stalin was still alive. The pillow was the grodiest of all. It was flimsy and stained black and brown. The cell was a sealed room with a thick metal door. Think small college dorm room, but packed with 4 beds. There's a small table and a tiny stool, both of which were bolted to the floor. In the corner was a toilet and a sink. The room measured 10 by 16 feet. Bulgarian law required 65 square foot per person, but this room had about half of that. When I entered, there was 1 person in the room. He was standing, as was expected by the guards when the door opened. "Do you speak Russian?" I asked him in Russian. "No," he replied in Bulgarian. "Do you speak English?" I asked. He replied, "Yes, speak English little, understand Russian little, but no talk." "I'm Ivica, please sit. 2 more people live here, Russian and Armenian. Now they go walking. They return soon. Don't speak English, speak Russian and Bulgarian. Empty bed at the window, for you." I looked at the bed. It was made of metal straps. Many, if not most, are broken and missing. With a real mattress, this wouldn't be a big issue, but with the dog mat I had, this was going to be painful. I had no idea how I was going to make it work, so I just threw the items on the bed until later. Someone started banging on the door loudly, then a loud clunk, and then another. This is a pattern that would become all too familiar. It signaled that the guards were opening the heavy metal door. Evans explained that when this happened, everyone was required to stand up and face the door. 2 new prisoners entered the cell, and the heavy metal door was locked behind them. One was middle-aged, the other in his 20s. The older man said something to me in Bulgarian that I didn't understand. He seemed welcoming and excited, though, to have a new person in the cell. Evans told him I did not speak Bulgarian, but spoke English and Russian. "Ah, welcome. I'm Vardo. This is Nikolai," the older man said in Russian. When speaking a foreign language, most people are shy and hesitant. Not me. I'm like a child with a firecracker. I mash whatever words I know together no matter how bad the result. Given Russian's complicated conjugations, this frequently causes people to laugh out loud. We spent the next few hours chatting and getting acquainted. Vardo was Armenian and lived in Bulgaria with his wife and kids. He had also lived in Russia. Nikolai was Russian but grew up in Bulgaria. Ivica was Serbian and was engaged to a Bulgarian woman who he met in prison in Serbia. This is the hard truth about Bulgarian prison guards. Before entering Bulgarian prison, my biggest fear was the guards. I know people who've done time in American prisons. Their worst stories are about the guards. I stayed in and passed through at least 5 Bulgarian prisons. Bulgarian prison guards are on a different level. Every Bulgarian prison guard I encountered was nice. They were human and acted professionally. They could not help prisoner situations, but they would talk to prisoners, carry on conversations, joke around, and even help them where they could to alleviate the realities of the Bulgarian prison system. They were never mean or even snide. I had a reasonable idea what a Russian prison was like, so I had prepared for the worst. Had assumed it to be better than a Russian prison. Bulgarian prisons should at least be up to European Union standards, right? Wrong. They didn't even meet pre-EU Bulgarian standards, which is a low bar to begin with. Vardo and Nikolai spent time in Russian prison. Ivica had been in Serbian prison. They all said Bulgarian prison was worse, and they preferred their former prisons. We were locked in our cell and never mixed with other prisoners. There was nothing to do except talk and smoke. I don't smoke, and I'm very sensitive to cigarette smoke. The only opening inside or out was a small hatch in the window about the size of a large phone. This provided very little ventilation, and the room was constantly filled with smoke. Prisoners were allowed nearly unlimited cigarettes as it kept them calm, and the other 3 prisoners smoked nearly nonstop. The cell was so small that only one person could stand up and move around at a time. If more than one person stood up, everyone else had to remain on their beds. How does one make a bed with the items provided in Bulgarian prison? I didn't know. Thankfully, Vardo made my bed for me and showed me how. It was more like a nest in hell than a bed, but it was the best that could be made of materials I had. And the pillow was incredibly disgusting. When new, it was white with blue stripes. Now it's nearly completely black, and even the stripes can barely be discerned. No pillowcase was provided, so I used a shirt as a pillowcase. The beds were old military-style beds made of metal straps. Mine, like the others, was severely broken. Straps were missing and welds were broken. With a flimsy cushion, this created huge holes and made sleeping very painful. One had to sleep until the pain got too bad, then repositioned to sacrifice a different body part. I developed sores and bruises all over my body. The floor would have been better, but there was no space to sleep on the floor. The other prisoners had better beds because their families had sent them several yoga mats and air mattresses, which they layered on the beds. No toilet paper, toothbrushes, or razors were provided. One needed to plan ahead or improvise. These and other items could be purchased from the prison store, but there was a bureaucratic catch that even the IRS would be proud of. The store was only open once or twice a month, and you needed money in a special account. And even if you had money, you couldn't use it. Money could only be deposited by people on the outside. The paper of rules I signed said that prisoners could earn money for toiletries for good behavior. But I had to poop before that happened, and the prisoners said this didn't actually happen due to budget cuts anyways. Fortunately, my cellmates were extremely kind people. I was constantly amazed at their generosity and how they shared everything. I found the same level of kindness in prisoners I met in prison vehicles, other prisons, and holding cells. We were locked in our cell 23 hours a day. I had assumed that there was a common area and prison yard and that our cell was just for sleeping. But like many things in Bulgarian prison, my assumptions were drastically incorrect. 23 hours a day in a cell designed for 2, but a double capacity of 4 made for extremely tight quarters. The 1 hour per day we were allowed out was to go walking, as Ivica described it. I was optimistic about this walking, but as before, I was disappointed when I found out the details. Going walking was often worse than staying in the cell. We even had to eat in our cell. The paper I signed declared all sorts of rights that prisoners had, but none of them mattered. In fact, I wish I had that paper to use for defecation duties since we weren't given toilet paper either. The paper I had to sign was merely a formality so that the Bulgarian government could pretend to be abiding by EU regulations. We were only given 2 small meals per day despite the law requiring 3. Meals were served in a small metal bowl about the size of a 10-ounce cat dish, less than a Coke can. Most times the bowls came only half filled. The only beverage came from the sink, except a tiny glass of fruit compote twice a week. At dinner, we were offered extra food, but we had to scoop it out and store it in old containers. Everyone refused the bonus because of how nasty it was. The bonus was paint, Bulgarian Play-Doh, or craft paste. The dried up yellow paint was margarine. As an after-dinner treat, margarine sucks. The salted Bulgarian Play-Doh was said to be cheese, but I'm doubtful. The kindergarten craft paste stuff I called Magic Mac. It was shredded pasta the size of rice mixed with a little bit of sugar. What saved us from starvation was a medium-sized loaf of bread each prisoner received every day. The bread was either several days old or overcooked and quite hard. The bread had other non-food uses that I'll discuss later. I was surprised they gave us the bread because the crust was so hard that it posed the danger of prisoners using it to club the guards. My first extradition court hearing was the next day. A lawyer who had never spoken with was supposed to come to the prison today, but didn't. We had no right to call our lawyers. I learned this was because we were detained rather than arrested. Bureaucracy loves wordplay. Bardot was in prison for 2 months before his family even knew why he disappeared or where he was. More than a year passed before the Bulgarian authorities notified his country of Armenia or the embassy. Technically, prisoners had a right to phone calls. Technically, but not practically. To make a phone call, you had to make a request a week in advance. Then on some assigned future Saturday, you'd be given 5 minutes. Lawyers typically don't answer on Saturdays, and it gets worse. The phone wasn't a cell phone, but you needed your own SIM card. If you didn't arrive with a SIM and credit, a family member had to bring one. But if you couldn't call family to tell them where you were, how could you tell them to bring you one? Bulgarian chicken and egg. Families were allowed to deliver things twice per month. Each prisoner was allowed 12 pounds of food, 12 pounds miscellaneous, and 50 packs of cigarettes. Yes, 50 packs of cigarettes every 2 weeks. Family visits were 45 minutes every 2 weeks. These visits occurred behind a plexiglass barrier. The intercom phones were from Soviet times, and many of them were barely usable, if at all. There wasn't much to do all day long. We slept, played cards, and talked in Russian. Sleeping was difficult, so the others smoked all day long and much of the night as well. 50 packs per person times 3 made for 150 packs of cigarettes every 2 weeks, nearly 11 packs per day. Any spare cigarettes were traded to the guards for small favors like a run to the shower to fetch warm water to make coffee. After a few days in Bulgarian prison, I started coughing up phlegm. I'm extremely sensitive to cigarette smoke. It's not just that I don't like it. My body reacts very badly to exposure to it. It makes me very ill. After 2 weeks, I shrunk from pant size 42 to 36. This was despite the others sharing their food with me that came from their families. This plus the smoke was making me very ill. At one point, Bardot asked the guards to bring a doctor for me. Edith told me that being in the hospital is worse because you are handcuffed to the bed, so don't go unless necessary. When the doctor arrived, she asked me in Russian what was wrong. I jokingly said it was my heart. She wanted to give me heart medicine, so I had to explain that I was broken-hearted because I was being kept away from my wife. She then offered me antibiotics, but I refused because I didn't have an infection. She was friendly and tried to help, but simply couldn't. The other prisoners wondered why I was so sick. I couldn't tell them to stop smoking, though, as they couldn't even if they tried. At least my bed was near the very small opening to the outside that allowed some fresh air in, albeit very cold as it was winter in Bulgaria. It had a second layer of glass that had been broken, so you could see a little bit of the outside world at least. They also made cold coffee, or sometimes warm when they traded a cigarette to a guard for a run to the shower for some hot water. Sometimes they would sleep with small bottles of water to warm them up. I don't like coffee and I dislike the smell as well, but compared to cigarette smoke, it was nothing. For filters, they used toilet paper and bottles and cups they had cut up. I only had one book with me and I was afraid to continue reading it. I wanted to save it until I was so bored that I could not possibly find any other way to pass the time, like saving a dessert for later. Bardot lent me a book, Bulgarian for English Speakers. I read it a few hours a day, but never really got into it. Then there were the cockroaches. Not just a few, an entire colony, possibly a few colonies. When I was a teenager, I worked for Orkin, and I had seen some nasty roach infestations, but nothing like this. The roaches had no fear and scurried about day and night. We played games by seeing who could kill the most, but we were still losing the battle. When I was a kid, we used to shoot flies with suction cup dart guns. I wished I had one of these in Bulgarian prison, although they wouldn't have done any damage to the roaches. They still would have been fun to target the roaches. We tried cockroach racing to pass the time. The first attempt was straight line dragster style. Roaches don't tend to scurry in straight lines, though. Next, I thought about setting up mazes which resembled Formula 1 circuits and simply seeing which roach could get out first. Unfortunately, roaches are climbers, they just went over the walls. The Formula R, the Kukucha Grand Prix, was an unsuccessful Formula 1 substitute. I don't think Red Bull will be calling soon to inquire about entering a team, but if anyone knows Christian Horner, please give him my contact. He already has experience dealing with Verstappen. The final attempt was a tractor pull style event using scotch tape and dental floss, but that didn't end very well either. Some cultures fall asleep by counting sheep, or elephants if you're Russian, but that's a story for another day. In Bulgarian prison, we counted roaches. Roaches make for a very different children's book about sleep. There was a single light above the door. It was behind glass and a large metal grate about the size of an oven door. There were so many roaches that they established traffic control patterns around the metal grate. On top, they moved to the right, and the bottom to the left. It was a legit roach highway system. Big Bulgarian bed bugs. When I worked at Orchid and people called in about roaches, the first question the secretaries asked was if they were German or American cockroaches. Usually people said they didn't know, but I'll never forget the time the guy screamed back, "I don't have to know. They aren't carrying any gosh darn flags and I didn't try to talk to them." Most roaches prefer the dark and don't like the noise. Bulgarian cockroaches weren't bothered by anything and were very bold. At night, the roaches crawled all over us. Talk about bed bugs. On the first night, I asked why the light was still on. Can we turn it off somehow? Does it go off after a certain time? Sadly, the answer was no to both questions. It stayed on 24 hours a day, and there was no way to turn it off. It was only dimmed by the varying levels of roach traffic on the glass. Between the broken beds, no heat, 24 hours of light, and roaches, it was very difficult to sleep.